It can be really tough to get sprint planning right, and it takes time. If you have too much detail, if you're excessively planning, you're anti-agile. All of a sudden, you're over-documenting, you're planning too much like traditional project management. And as we know, plans can change, and especially in this rapid speed of change that we're experiencing in today's environment, planning more than just for the next sprint or two, it's too much. And you'll probably end up doing rework at that point. And it is anti-agile. So we don't want to have too much detail, but if we don't have enough detail, then the development team, they sit down and they're getting to work, and all of a sudden they realize, oh, I don't actually understand this user story. They didn't take the opportunity during planning to talk about the user story and to truly understand and create transparency of that vision. So what happens when we have too many questions is that we have to wait for the product owner to go run and get clarification from stakeholders, and then that creates delays. It can also lead to inflation because the story might be bigger than what we thought it was. We missed the opportunity to ask questions when we were planning. Now during the sprint, we end up with a bigger story than we thought we had. So that can be problematic. Some teams like to use what's called a sprint zero. A sprint zero is a sprint that doesn't actually result in a product increment. There are some people who really like sprint zero, and they say, I like this. It gives us a chance to get a better idea of the work. We can sort of start working and gain momentum. We can gain confidence and clarity. Those who are against it say, no, this is anti-Scrum, because the rules of Scrum say that at the end of every sprint, we have to have a potentially shippable product or increment. And a lot of the founders and contributors to Scrum are not really in favor of a sprint zero. Alistair Coburn, who was one of the original authors of the Agile Manifesto, Ken Schwaber from scrum.org, and then Mike Cohn. So that doesn't mean that it's necessarily right or wrong. Scrum is only, the Agile Manifesto was authored in 2001. That's relatively new. If Agile is 2001, Scrum, it had its beginnings back then as well, but it's still new. It's still a young framework overall, and that means that people are still discovering best practices. And if Scrum Zero works for your team, then that's kind of what you need to do. And nobody would tell you that's wrong if you're developing usable product increments that the customer is thrilled with and you're creating value, then it's okay. The Scrum Guide. Does anybody want to guess how many pages are in the Scrum Guide? This is the Scrum Guide that tells you all the things we're talking about today and how to perform Scrum. Does anybody want to guess how many pages it is? Some of you might know already. Yeah, that's right. Thank you. It's 19 pages. So right, 20 pages. That's it. That's all you get from those individuals who authored the Scrum Guide. So of course, you're going to find best practices and things that work for you. This course itself has about, I don't know how many more slides than the Scrum Guide has pages. So best practices, they're growing, developing, and it is okay because Scrum Guide doesn't prescribe how you set up your project. And this is just one of the ways that Scrum teams have decided this works for us. Yeah, it is. It's very soft on documentation. I would agree. So when we are in our Scrum, our sprint, I mean, so we've exited out of planning. Now we have a sprint backlog. We've committed to do the work, and we're in the moment. We're having our sprint, and we'll call it a 2-week sprint for the sake of this discussion, but it could be 1 to 4, and we even saw 5 as a best practice in our chat. Every single day during the sprint, the team will meet and discuss. They'll have something called a daily scrum or a daily stand-up. And they'll talk about, there'll be 3 main topics. But first, who should participate? The development team is going to be at the center of this because they're the ones who are actually doing the work right now. But the Scrum Master is there to help with time blocking and reminding everybody this is a 15-minute meeting, no more. And if we accidentally get off topic, the Scrum Master will remind us of what that stand-up is really all about, reserving off-topic subjects for a separate discussion. The product owner should be there because this is when oftentimes we need that clarification or a question will come up. So the product owner might have an answer right then and there, which can keep development going, keep that momentum going. Some organizations will also have something called Scrum of Scrums. And this is if your organization is attempting to scale. We won't get into scaling very much, or this is it actually in this introductory class. But when the teams get too large and you notice that your daily stand-ups are getting longer and longer and maybe they are exceeding the 15-minute time block, it might be time to explore some solutions like Scrum of Scrums. So it's a way of breaking up the teams into smaller teams, but still communicating back and forth. So each team will have an ambassador who participates in a Scrum of Scrums, usually not every day, but maybe a few times a week, and resolves coordination and makes sure that those teams are collaborating well. So it wouldn't be necessarily the Scrum Master who participates in that. It should be your best communicator, whoever the best communicator is, who can bring information to and from your team. So during the Scrum, the daily Scrum, we're keeping an eye on that sprint backlog. That is the increment of work or the user stories that have been pulled into this particular sprint. So that's going to be the goal for this sprint. And it's a subset of the product backlog. It's usually just a few manageable user stories that can be completed within a sprint. During the daily stand-up, the team will ask or answer 3 questions. You go around the team and you go over 3 questions. What are those? For those of you who participate in your daily stand-up, what 3 questions do you cover together with your team? And these should take up 15 minutes of time only with you and your team members going around and each person talks. So we say, what did I do yesterday? Yeah, right. What did I accomplish yesterday? Right, where are we? Perfect. Wonderful. Okay, great chat. You're all getting it. Thank you. What did I do yesterday? What will I do today? What are my roadblocks? Or some version of those 3 questions. When a team member announces a roadblock, should the team stop and fix it together? Is this the time for that during the daily stand-up? No. Correct. Because the development team needs to get back to developing. And that roadblock might not involve every member of the team. It might be a particular person. So if another team member has the answer, they can meet offline. They can say, okay, right after the meeting, we'll talk and I'll show you how to do that, but not during the daily stand-up. You can do some quick math to see the impact of this. So take 15 minutes times, let's see, times number of team members and come up with your calculation and see just how many hours of total team time are spent. So if we keep going over the time blocks for these meetings, the impact can be quite expensive and it's anti-Scrum at that point. Yeah, so in the chat, do you have any tips on how a Scrum Master can encourage a team member to keep their stand-up concise and value-focused? Yes, I do. So the way it works is very easy. Remember, tactile, simple tools. If you have a board game at home that has one of those little egg timers in it, a lot of times it'll be like a 2-minute timer. You don't want it to be too long. A 2-minute timer would be good. The other thing you can do is if you have issues with interruptions, you can have a symbol that would be like a talking stick. And so if you use a symbol of some sort where once you're done, you pass this item to the next person and whoever's holding the item is the only person who can talk, that will also help with interruptions that can sometimes send the meeting off track. So a 2-minute timer and a talking stick tend to help keep things on track. And it might feel funny at first, but it is actually the Scrum Master's job. That was perfect that you brought that up. It is the Scrum Master's job to help keep those guardrails in place. So if the roadblocks are at the organizational level, the Scrum Master is the person who will go and try to remove those roadblocks and clear the path for the team to be to be focused on development. So we have burn charts. Oh, 15-minute time block. So burn charts are an example of an information radiator where the team can see exactly what progress they are making every single day. This is a burn down chart. Some teams might prefer to see a burn up chart to show the work that's being accomplished as opposed to the work that's remaining. It's a great communication tool. It should be easy to see wherever all the team members are located. If you are a distributed team, virtual team, then it should be somewhere that's easy to access and not password protected or hard to get to. So those would be best practices for having an information radiator. Let me take a look at the time left and what I've got. Here we go. We're going to just make our way through the next 2 slides and then we'll take our break. So if you recall earlier, we said a great Scrum team, a great development team within a Scrum team should represent all of the skill sets necessary to do the work. And here is a demonstration of why that's so helpful. If we have specialists that are all specialists, but they don't have a lot of knowledge, broad knowledge, what we tend to call this is I-shaped, the letter I. I'm typing it in right now so you can see it. Okay, I-shaped means I have deep knowledge in one area and that's it. I only design, I only code, I only test. Again, it doesn't have to be software related. It could be, I only know how to greet our customers. I only know how to work the cash register. I only know how to do inventory. If we have that going on, then we end up with bottlenecks of work where I have to stop and I can't help the customer or I can't do this. I have to go find somebody else who can. And there tend to be these bottlenecks that form between the functions or the processes that happen. So what we want to do and what the Scrum Master can attempt to do for the team is to cross-train so that you have generalized specialists, people who do have deep knowledge in one area, but they also have broad knowledge across a number of areas. So we call that T-shaped because now it's not just the deep knowledge that represents kind of the stick, but the T, the top, shows that I have broad knowledge and maybe I don't know everything about testing, but I know enough that some of these tasks I can help. I can go ahead and take one off the board and work on it right now. This is different than multitasking. Multitasking is a bad word, and you'll see why in a little while. We'll talk about why it's bad. But this is not multitasking. It has a different word called swarming. Swarming is when I finish a task and I can go hover over another area and pick up that work and help there, but I'm still only working on one task at a time. So now we free up the bottlenecks and what we call throughput, which is the amount of work we can accomplish in a certain amount of time, it increases tremendously because we've freed that bottleneck. When we get back from break, we are going to pick up with the sprint review. So the next event in the Scrum framework. I'm going to pull in our timer right now for break. And the timer, let's see if I can locate that. Here we go. All right, it'll be a 15-minute timer. So when we get back, we'll pick up with the sprint review. I'll see you back here in just a little bit, and let's refresh that to 15 minutes. All right, see you back in just a bit.